September 9, 1921, a schooner pulled away from Nome, Alaska, carrying Ada Blackjack toward Wrangel Island. She stood on deck as the shoreline receded, not chasing exploration or glory, but $50 a month. That sum was the difference between medicine and decline for her son Bennett, who was sick with tuberculosis. She had placed him in the Jesse Lee Home for Children because she could not afford his care. The expedition was employment, nothing more. Ada had been born in 1898 on the Seward Peninsula, where weather determined consequence. Her father died when she was young. Her mother sent Ada and her sister to a Methodist mission in Nome. There she learned English, reading, writing, cooking, cleaning, and sewing. She did not learn the older survival skills of hunting, trapping, or reading sea ice. Sewing became her trade. In the Arctic, stitching is insulation. A poor seam can kill as efficiently as exposure. At 16, she married Jack Blackjack, a hunter and dog sled driver. The marriage was violent. He beat her and later abandoned her. 2 of her children died. Bennett survived, but illness shadowed him year after year. When her husband left, Ada carried the boy back to Nome, working as a cleaner and seamstress. It was not enough. The expedition that hired her was organized by Vilhjalmur Stefansson, who intended to claim Wrangel Island for Britain. 4 young men were recruited: Allan Crawford, 20, Fred Maurer, 28, Milton Galle, 19, and Lorne Knight, 28. They needed a seamstress. They needed someone to maintain clothing and prepare food. Ada signed because she needed wages. She had been told Inuit families would join the expedition. That promise mattered. She did not want to be the only woman among strangers. On departure day, no families arrived. She hesitated. The men reassured her they would recruit help in Siberia. She boarded anyway. The voyage north was unstable from the beginning. At East Cape in Siberia, they tried to secure an Inupiat, a skin boat necessary for hunting marine mammals. It was too expensive. They failed to hire Inuit assistance. Instead, they purchased a heavy wooden dory, an inferior substitute. A boat acquired earlier in the journey was later blown away. During storms, supplies were thinner than planned. When Wrangel Island finally appeared through the Arctic haze in mid-September, it did not resemble opportunity. It was treeless, exposed, edged by ice. They landed and raised a British flag. The schooner that had brought them turned away. Ada watched it leave. The camp began immediately. Driftwood was gathered for building and fuel. A winter house was constructed against a hillside, reinforced later with snow blocks and sod. Sleeping spaces were divided. Ada's section doubled as a kitchen. In the early weeks, routine disguised risk. The men recorded wildlife and geology. They trapped foxes. Ada cooked, cleaned, scraped hides, and sewed garments from skins. In the evenings, there were jokes, hymns, and the small presence of a cat named Vic. But the relief ship was already months away, and winter was closing. By October 1921, daylight shortened fast over Wrangel Island. Wind pressed constantly against the walls of their shelter, testing every seam Ada had stitched into their clothing and every log wedged into the structure. The island had no trees, only driftwood carried in by currents. Every board burned in the stove would not grow back. In the beginning, the men treated the expedition like a study. Allan Crawford catalogued rocks and animals. Milton typed notes. Fred and Lorne ranged outward to hunt. Foxes were trapped for fur. Polar bears moved across the ice at a distance, white against white. The island seemed harsh but manageable. Ada worked without pause. She cooked what meat they brought in, repaired boots, patched mittens, dried skins, and kept the interior organized. Her labor was constant and practical. Without it, they would have deteriorated faster. Homesickness struck her early. She cried often. She spoke about Bennett. The men were young and impatient with grief. They teased her. At one point, when she refused to mend boots immediately, Lorne tied her to a flagpole until she complied. The act made clear her position within their hierarchy. She was essential but not equal. Polar bears became an immediate threat rather than distant figures on the horizon. One night, while the men were out hunting, Ada heard heavy breathing outside the tent. The animal circled close, sniffing. She remained motionless in darkness as the stove fire faded. When Milton returned and shot the bear, he found her rigid with fear. Winter has settled fully, the temperature dropped, and the wind intensified. Darkness stretched across months. Hunting became inconsistent. Their initial 6 months of provisions were designed to supplement, not replace game. Supplies dwindled faster than expected. They anticipated relief. In the summer of 1922, a schooner named the Teddy Bear had been arranged to deliver supplies and reinforcements. It attempted to reach the island, but was turned back by heavy ice. The expedition did not learn this immediately. They waited through open water months, scanning the horizon for sails that never appeared. By late summer 1922, the absence became undeniable. They were alone with limited food, one inadequate boat, and no outside communication. Scurvy began to show signs: swollen gums, weak joints, exhaustion that did not lift. The only protection available was fresh raw meat. When hunting failed, their bodies weakened quickly. Conversations shifted. The island no longer felt temporary. It felt indefinite. The first winter had been endured with expectation of relief. The second approached without promise. By late 1922, the camp, the notebooks were still there. The instruments were still unpacked. But the work was no longer scientific. It was arithmetic. Calories in, strength out. Days until freeze. Scurvy tightened its hold, gums softened, teeth loosened. Bruises surfaced without cause. Lorne Knight deteriorated fastest. His joints swelled. Walking became labor. The encyclopedia in camp confirmed what they already understood. Without fresh food, the body dismantles itself. They moved camp once to secure more driftwood and fuel. The relocation cost energy they did not have. The men studied maps and measured distance to Siberia. The sea ice would eventually form a bridge. The nearest wireless station lay hundreds of miles away. It was an enormous gamble. Staying might mean slow collapse. Leaving might mean immediate loss. In January 1923, they tried. A sled was loaded with supplies. Dogs were harnessed. The ice beyond Wrangel Island was uneven, broken by pressure ridges that rose like frozen barricades. Progress was slow. The cold burned fingers through mittens. Allan froze his fingertips. After 2 weeks of effort and minimal advance, they turned back. The return was silent. Failure meant the second winter would be faced with no guarantee of rescue. The group reassessed. A smaller party might travel lighter and faster. Lorne was too ill to attempt the journey. Ada had never been trained in navigating sea ice and remained terrified of polar bears. The decision was presented as practical. 3 would go, 2 would remain. On January 29, 1923, Allan Crawford, Fred Maurer, and Milton Galle left camp with the sled and dogs. They promised to return with help. Ada watched them disappear into white distance. The day after they left, wind erased their tracks. Ada and Lorne rationed their remaining bread into 6 small pieces per day. They waited for spring birds, for seals, for any sign that the gamble had succeeded. No message came back across the ice. From that point forward, survival narrowed to 2 people inside one shelter, one growing weaker, one untrained, afraid, and still responsible for keeping both alive. The morning after, the men vanished into the ice. The wind rose hard enough to blur the horizon. Any path they had carved across the frozen sea was erased within hours. Ada stood outside the shelter longer than necessary, staring at a blank white field where 3 figures had been. There was nothing to read in it. Inside, Lorne Knight was already failing. Scurvy had hollowed him out. His gums bled. His legs trembled when he stood. He fainted once while chopping wood, collapsing face first into snow. Ada dragged him back inside, believing for a moment he had died. He had not. But the strength that had once made him confident was gone. Food was counted in pieces. Bread was rationed into small, dry portions. Meat from traps became the difference between endurance and decline. But trapping requires consistency, and consistency requires strength. Ada had not grown up hunting. She had grown up sewing. Now she carried traps across frozen ground alone. At first she took only a snow knife for protection. The rifle felt foreign in her hands. Polar bears still crossed the island. Their tracks appeared without warning. Each outing required, forcing her body forward while her mind urged retreat. When she caught her first fox alone, she brought it back with visible relief. Fresh meat was not a luxury. It was medicine against scurvy. It was protein. It was a continuation. Lorne's condition worsened. Pain made him irritable. He criticized her methods, her pace, the way she hides. Accusations replaced gratitude. He accused her of not feeding him enough. She answered simply that she was starving too. There were stretches when she herself weakened to the point of near collapse. Hunger and stress narrowed her vision. In her journal, she wrote instructions. In case of her death, outlining what should happen to Bennett. The entry was practical. It read like preparation, not despair. Then something shifted. The fear did not disappear. It was reorganized. She began practicing with the rifle deliberately, setting small targets and firing until her hand steadied. She forced repetition into her movements. She checked traps daily, whether she felt capable or not. She skinned and cooked what she caught. Without hesitation, the work became routine, not because it was easy, because it was necessary. By spring 1923, the island began to move again. Birds returned first, cutting across a sky that had been empty for months. Eggs appeared in nests along the cliffs. The light lengthened, snow softened at the edges. For Ada, the change in season meant something practical. More chances to hunt, more chances to gather. Lorne did not improve with the light. His body was deep into scurvy. Dark blotches marked his skin. His legs swelled. He could no longer leave the shelter. Pain sharpened his temper. He criticized her constantly, the way she worked, the way she cut meat, the way she organized supplies. The words came from a man watching his own strength vanish. Ada stopped arguing. She shifted from reacting to directing. If she was going to survive, she would work according to her judgment. She built a raised lookout platform near camp to watch for bears and ships. From there she could scan the horizon with field glasses. Before stepping onto open ground, she attempted to build a boat from driftwood and skins. A working boat meant access to seals and walrus. It meant fat, dense calories that could carry her through another winter. The first attempt failed. Wind took it. Before it could be secured properly, she watched weeks of labor vanish across gray water. She began again when she shot a bird cleanly from the air. She did not celebrate, plucked it, cooked it, and set bones aside. The act mattered because it proved she could provide meat without assistance. By June 1923, Lorne Knight could no longer stand without help. Ada recorded dates carefully in her journal. Facts anchored her. In late June, after months of decline, he died. There was no one to assist her with burial. She constructed a barrier of wood and debris around his body to protect it from animals. It was not a ceremony. It was prevention. After that, the camp held one human voice. Ida and the cat Vic remained. The three men who had left in January had not returned. The island did not change in response. It waited. After Lorne Knight's death, in late June 1923, the camp fell silent in a way it never had before. There were no arguments, no shared decisions, no second pair of footsteps in the snow. Ada marked the date in her journal. Recording it mattered. It fixed the event in something solid. Without witnesses, facts had to be written down. She was now alone on Wrangel Island except for the cat, Vic. The shelter still required fuel. The stove still needed tending. Meat still had to be secured. Nothing about survival was reduced because she was the only one left. She reorganized the camp for efficiency. Tools were placed within immediate reach. Ammunition was checked and counted. Traps were reset with deliberate spacing to conserve energy. She stopped carrying the snow knife alone and relied fully on the rifle. Fear remained, but it no longer controlled her movements. Polar bears continued to roam the island. Tracks appeared near camp. She climbed her lookout platform before venturing out, scanning for movement. When she stepped onto open ground, it was calculated. She gathered eggs from returning birds. She shot more game as the weather permitted. Eventually, she killed her first seal alone. The work of butchering it was slow and physically punishing. but the reward was critical. Seal meat provided food, fat provided fuel, blood provided protection against scurvy. She stored what she could, aware that summer would not last. Time stretched in repetition. Check traps, haul wood, melt ice, cook, clean, scan the horizon. There were no signs of the 3 men who had left in January. No tracks across the ice, no distant movement. The Arctic offered no message back. In August 1923, fog rolled in thick along the coast. Ada continued her routine. Routine was defense against panic. Then she heard something unfamiliar, a low mechanical rumble. At first she mistook it for walrus shifting on the beach. The sound returned steady and rhythmic. She climbed to her lookout and raised field glasses into gray air. Through thinning fog a mast appeared. A ship. The mast held steady through the fog. Ada did not wait to confirm it twice. She ran across uneven ground, down toward the beach, through cold surf that soaked her boots. For a moment, she expected to see 3 familiar figures standing on deck. Allan, Fred, Milton, alive, returned, apologetic. Instead, strangers lowered a boat. The vessel was the Donaldson sent north to retrieve what remained of Stefansson's venture. Harold Noy stepped ashore, expecting to find 5 members of the expedition. He found one woman in worn furs, thin from labor, alert in a way that comes from long isolation. Ada asked about the 3 men who had left in January. Noyce had no news of them. They had not reached Siberia. No message had been received. Their trail ended somewhere on the ice between Wrangel Island and the mainland. The finality of it landed slowly. For months she had worked under the assumption that help might come because they had succeeded. Now she understood she had survived alone. Her composure, maintained through hunger and death, broke at the shoreline. She wept openly. Before departure, Noyce and his crew buried Lorne Knight properly. They documented the camp, the supplies remaining, the notes and journals, the raised lookout, the reinforced shelter, the stored skins, the rifle, evidence of 2 winters of endurance. Ada gathered what she could carry: tools, personal belongings, the journal she had written in, the cat. When the ship pulled away from Wrangel Island, she did not look back long. The island had taken 4 men and nearly taken her. She had arrived as a seamstress hired for wages. She left as the only surviving member of the expedition. Behind her, driftwood structures stood against wind. That would eventually dismantle them. Ahead, land that held hospitals, questions, and consequences waited. The Arctic released her, without explanation, but it did not return the others. When Ada Blackjack returned south in 1923, her survival became a headline before it became a life again. Newspapers described her as a castaway heroine, the woman who outlasted 4 men in the Arctic. Photographs showed her in furs smaller than the story built around her. The narrative was simplified quickly. Endurance makes for a clean copy. The months of humiliation, hunger, and exhaustion did not. Questions followed the rescue. Lorne Knight had died in her care. Fragments of complaint from his journal circulated. Some suggested she had not done enough. The accusation traveled easily. A poor indigenous woman surviving where white men had not was difficult for some to accept without suspicion. Ada answered plainly. She described the scurvy, the rationing, the work she performed daily, the fact that she had been starving too. Eventually, the accusation was withdrawn. It did not erase the months she had already endured. She had not been paid everything promised. Others profited more from the story than she did. Stefansson's ambitions remained debated. The political claim to Wrangel Island failed. The expedition had not secured the empire. It had secured a loss. Ada used what money she received to reunite with Bennett and seek better treatment for his tuberculosis. They spent time in Seattle pursuing care. She later had another son, Billy. She married again. Her life resumed its pattern of labor and responsibility. The 3 men who left across the sea ice in January 1923 were never found. Bennett survived into adulthood, though illness. He died decades later. Ada lived until 1983, reaching 85 years of age. In time, Alaska recognized her survival formally. A plaque marked her grave. On Wrangel Island, wind still moves across the same beaches where she once ran toward a mast in fog. The driftwood shelter is gone. The ice forms and breaks as it did before she arrived. What remains is quieter. A woman who had never been trained to hunt learned because she had no alternative. And for 2 Arctic winters, that was enough.